Much respect, fam. This is a free lecture from the Ministry of Spiritology's YouTube channel. I am the Naturalist Minister Nkantwi Fokwa Ambe, the initiator of the Ministry of Spiritology and the director of the Association for Cultural Awareness. Now, in this particular recording, we will be talking about the nature of God under the topic, what is God, or who is God? Now, specifically in the Ministry of Spiritology being a holistic and naturalist ministry, we're not going to go into looking at the nature of God from a personified perspective. Specifically, we'll be looking at God in its holistic conception, seeing God actually as not the creator in a personified anthropomorphized concept, but more as the principle and source of creation. Because when we're talking about God, we want to define this word. That's what we should start off by doing. God. So everyone uses this word, especially in the Western hemisphere of the earth. You see it. This is going to be important that we should take note of this idea that the earth, if you accept it's round, of course. I'm not a flat earther myself, but we want to, of course, give you that objectivity to understand that the earth is divided actually into Western and Eastern hemisphere. Of course, you're going to have Africa, you're going to have Europe, I don't know, Italy kind of sticking out here, joining like that, something of that nature. We know Asia will be over here. You have your South America, and of course you have your Antarctica. Now, when we're talking about Western and Eastern hemispheres, typically the whole concept, it's arbitrary in our minds that this is fabricated. We have what you would know as the Roman side of the earth. I want this to be very well understood in this discourse, and we have the Asian side of the earth, or what they call Oriental, you see it, or what this will be called Western. Typically we note it as, and we have here what is called the Eastern world. Now, these conceptions have to be documented inside our mind as we're going to get to this discourse, because I want you to realize that in the Western hemisphere of the earth, the Roman, the Christian side of the earth, typically, the conception of God follows the Christian religion, essentially. Here you'll see you have various forms of Christianity practiced in Europe. Even in South America, you have the same thing through the colonial efforts and everything. Oh, I'm forgetting lovely America. You see it, because that's the triangle of Christianity in the Western world. When you want to go into the Eastern world now, you're going to find Buddhism, Hinduism, yoga. You're going to find your Kemetic-derived traditions specifically. Always remember, when we're talking about Kemet, we're talking about ancient Egypt here in Africa as being the pinnacle of the ancient civilizations of the earth specifically, and that is the tradition which the Ministry of Spiritology holds as its prime tradition for the advance and its naturalist teaching to promote what I would call essentially pure spirituality, naturalist spirituality. We used to talk more in context of African spirituality here, but we realized that what we're fighting for the earth from our platform is for the normalization of theological respect, essentially, for the naturalist traditions. That is the pre-Christian, I don't want to say pre-Abrahamic, because even when we talk of Islam, Islam has a naturalist connotation, which it respects. But before the Roman Judeo-Christian religion took over the world, essentially, what was called pagan by the Romans essentially is naturalist. Pagan is just a term that means country folk. When we say pagan, country folk, C-O-U-N-T-R, country folk. The Romans were referring to those people who lived outside of the established Roman Empire, the people who still lived in the countryside, the people who practiced naturalist religions, essentially. That's where we get this word pagan from, that people seem to think is such a derogatory word when it's not, all in their context of trying to look at God. When we're trying to look at God, we want to recognize that God actually, in its purity, is a pagan concept. God does not belong to Christianity. Literally, I want to say this. When we want to even start talking about this word God, the word God It comes from a Proto-Germanic word. That's Old English. People always forget that Britain, as its islands that they are, it was migrations from Germanic tribes like the Angles, tribes that were the Franks, the Saxons, eventually the Lombardic Empire, essentially, the Lombards. These are clans or tribes that were established in Europe from Germanic migrations, which took the word Godin. Actually, it's a derived form of the name Odin, because there's also Wodan, from which we have Wednesday derived in the English weekdays. But the name Odin refers to the Norse god, the chief god of the Norse pantheon, the personified entity known as Odin, which was their supreme deity. And when they say Odin, like I'm trying to point out, they have the derived version of Woden, and then you have the derived version here of Godin, and Godin itself is Lombardic. And what's interesting about Godin is that they shortened the first three letters of Godin, which equals Odin, which equals Godin, and got God, because when we had the activities of Augustine Canterbury, who was doing his conversion of the Germanic tribes in the British Isles at that time, the translations of the Bible which were used and rendered eventually used the name Godin and Woad predominantly, and God has just evolved now to be used in the King James versions of the Bible, which was translated in 1611 from the basis of this tradition of using Odin to Woad to God. And essentially, it's just used throughout the entire Bible for the pronoun usage of its name, what they claim is the proper name of what is this entity conceived to be the supreme being. Because when we're talking about God, God is what people want to call the supreme being. But what we want to realize God actually is not a being. You see it, this being that makes God some type of a personified form is the error in our reasoning of what we're trying to understand as the source of reality. I think this is how we're supposed to be conceiving what is the nature of God, now that we understand that God is actually the proper name of Odin, even. And if you even take it further back in its usage, it's more of a verb. You see it. They have a term that they used to use. I think it was called gudan. It was used in some references to mean to invoke, when some comparisons are made with Sanskrit, or to call, to invoke. So when you're using this word reference God, gudan, you're actually even also saying you are invoking, or you're making a call. So you could God Yahweh, you could God Allah, you could God Odin, you could God Shango. You could God Brahma, you could God Krishna, you could God many of these entities that are personifications of nature, which is what we start to realize that God is, because the original humans, they weren't Christians, they weren't Jews, they weren't Abrahamists, they weren't Islamists, they weren't Christians. Technically, when you do religious studies, what is explained to you is that humanity has made a descent of understanding from being animist to what they would call maybe polytheist. I know this is a real simplification, because we have the henotheist concept, and henotheists are people who recognize the existence of many archetypes or many entities, but they only give their, should I say, devotion to one. And then you have the eventually descent to monotheism, which is the assumed concept that there's a belief in one God. But you see, to arrive at the belief in one God, you had to pass through the belief in many gods. And before there was the belief in many gods, you see, humanity at its earliest stages of consciousness perceived the reality of the source of reality. You see, they perceived the nature of the source of reality in an animist conception. That means that they were pantheist. You see it. And the pantheist conception is that there is a spirit, essentially. You see it. There is a divine conscious energy that exists in everything. The lay way to say it would be that God is in everything, God is the universe. You see it, that is the lay way they like to define pantheists. But I want to be really rationally scientific in this. Our explanation as naturalists, to give you this explanation from the Ministry of Spiritology, so that you see academically how we do treat our concepts in definition of God. You see it, working with this pantheist concept, you see, we recognize that, how could I best explain it? Let me explain it with this scientific model. You see it, you have an atom, which at the atom center it has its nucleus. You see it. Around it there are protons, and you have your electrons and neutrons as well. You see it. All of these are going on as particles. You see, moving in orbit around the atom. Essentially, that's what we're taught in science classes. Now, when we're talking about spirit, you see, we're talking about a conscious energy. So it's not going to be the particles, it's not going to be the atom itself that we're talking about. What we're saying is that there is still a component energy. You see it, there is still some form or force or energy or power that is existing, that causes the movement of electrons to shift from around one nucleus to another to form the various elements that make up the periodic table, which form together to create the various molecules that from there move on into forming the basis of reality that you see in everything around us. You see, everything can be broken down into the elements of the periodic table before we start getting into relationships of physics and light and sound. So all of this moving in the universe therefore makes our existence mechanized. It's an old concept that the ancient Kemetians, our ancestors, had established, that everything in reality moves by a process. Just like you see that water is in a standing body of a lake or a puddle, and it's so hot because the sun at a distance of what they say 93 million miles away, 143.6 kilometers, imagine, million kilometers from the earth. And this heat is able to warm this water at a slow temperature, allowing it to evaporate, such that as it evaporates now, with the sun moving on its axis and turning with this spin, you see it's able now to create an atmosphere in which this water moisture can only go so high and then get trapped, such that with its weight in this rotation causes it to condense into clouds, and when it gets heavy enough, it falls back to the earth in the form of water droplets as rain. You see, all of this process, the sun, it's outside of the planet, but it shows you that the universe, reality in itself, operates like a type of machine, and it has various parts in it. Now, when they wanted to start talking about God, you see, our ancestors took the various celestial beings, manifestations, ideas, thought forms, and created stories of mythology which show the relationship between all of these principalities, essentially, in reality, to give a meaning and explanation based on their observation and experience of reality over thousands, millions of years. You see it? And this is how the whole idea of God came into existence, such that, the term that they're using in the Germanic from the Roman Christian interpretation, it's corrupt, it's ambiguous, not ambiguous, yes, it's ambiguous, that's the word, it's ambiguous, it's confusing. So people use it without understanding. What we're talking about is so much greater than just this idea of God. And then they try to link it to the idea of the Trinity and saying that now this idea of the source of reality is Jesus Christ. You see, one rabbi who would have existed perhaps in the peak of the Roman Empire. I don't want to diverse into all of that. That's why my words are kind of jumpy. But that's what we're talking about. We're talking about God and the nature of God, using spiritology as a lens or as a reference point. We're talking about the source of reality. We're not talking about the supreme being that created existence, that some man named Jesus, a white man with long brown hair and blue eyes, or brown eyes and blonde hair, stood outside of the universe in a hyper dimension and said, "Let there be light, let there be creation." No, my people, that's impossible. It's never occurred and didn't exist. It's only understood in a mythological sense, and I think that's what we'll come back to in a part 2 on this particular topic: what is God, who is God, the nature of God as per spiritology. So I hope you've been able to get to this 15-minute point of this hour video. Like I pointed out, we're going to do a part 2. So if you've been able to follow us this far, make sure that if you enjoyed it, of course, you do hit like, share this video to people, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you'll continue to get notifications of our subsequent free lectures. And of course, the Minister's Red Pill Diaries is another segment on our TV station that, of course, I said TV station, I should say YouTube channel is probably what I was trying to say, but essentially you've got it. We'll come back in the part 2. If you like what we're doing, like, subscribe, share, make people keep knowing essentially what we're working on here. I have been the Naturalist Minister in Kanwe Foko Ambe. Peace. Profound. That's how we're just going to end it, and we're coming right back to you.